I know this last episode of Mandalorian might not be everyone's favorite, but I really enjoyed it. Now, a lot of people have been calling Star Wars content lately filler, and that kind of bothers me, especially when people are making these accusations when the season isn't even over. I mean, remember when Mando goes to Sundari and gets captured and we have to return to Bo-Katan's castle, which really messed up the pacing for that episode? Well, that entire sequence with Bo-Katan saving Din was actually crucial to the future of the Mandalorians. It wasn't filler like everyone thought it was. Plus, in this recent episode, we got to see Jack Black, Christopher Lloyd, and Lizzo in the Star Wars galaxy. We also got to see the Mandalorian mercenaries break apart a union of star-crossed lovers from species that can never truly be with one another. There's just something incredibly fun and zany about this episode. I feel like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni went all out. And I'm glad to see someone finally flexing those creative art design muscles. I think most of us are a bit tired of Tatooine or Tatooine clones, just sand in general. But perhaps the most interesting part of the most recent episode was the planet of Plazir 15. Being a Star Wars lore nerd with a specific interest in the various political systems in the galaxy, I was obviously very interested in Plazir 15, which actually, the name of the planet comes from the word Plazir in French, which means pleasure. And it's very fitting for this seemingly utopian society, which is governed by a direct democracy system. One of the first we've seen in the Star Wars galaxy, and it's kind of crazy. You know, Star Wars as a franchise has always criticized authoritarian regimes, which is important, but also like kind of obvious, right? I hope. The Galactic Empire, the First Order, even the Separatist Alliance with its rubber stamp parliament was actually an authoritarian regime masquerading as a parliamentary democracy. The Sith in ancient times created empires as well. Even the Mandalorians had imperial ambitions during their crusading phase. Even without Star Wars, most people understand that authoritarian regimes are not the ideal system you'd want to live under. But my goal has always been to point out the inefficiencies of authoritarian regimes, their hypocrisy, and why systems like this without checks and balances are ultimately going to be inferior to a government where the people rule by committee. In case you guys haven't noticed, I am a little bit worried about the rise of the populist authoritarian all over our own world. It's sickening. But the reality is, criticizing authoritarian regimes is not enough. If we all truly want to live in a better world, I think it's equally as important to develop criticism for the other end of the spectrum as well. Liberal democracies like the Galactic Republic and the New Republic have quite a lot of flaws on their own, and it's almost a time-honored tradition to complain and criticize in these type of government structures. You know, as an American, I'm very used to my government and military intervening all across the world, and a lot of times we do this with good intention, but we oftentimes fail in our intended goal and cause a lot more havoc and problems than were originally there. And I think one of the most important lessons we can learn from this is, instead of just trying to change the world outside, we can lead by example, strengthen our democracy and our economy at home, and maybe renew our interest in what it means to be a republic. You know, the prequels warned us about the inherent weaknesses of a republic and how fear and economic uncertainty can push a thriving democracy towards corporatism or authoritarianism. And with the release of the sequel trilogy, Disney actually did something pretty interesting in my opinion. I know I'm not talking about the overly fascist and cartoon-like First Order. I'm talking about the New Republic, the successor of the Rebel Alliance after the Galactic Civil War ended. Instead of seeing a utopian society emerge out of the ashes of the Empire, we see a fledgling New Republic struggling to find its own identity and unite the galaxy once again. The New Republic is not a perfect system. If anything, it's repeating many of the mistakes that the Empire and the Galactic Republic made before it. For instance, in the novel Bloodlines, one of the major criticisms levied against the New Republic was the massive partisan bickering that was going on between the two main political parties in the Senate, and that was basically gridlocking the New Republic from being an effective government. As the first executive, the New Republic, Mon Mothma had enjoyed universal support from the populace. As a popular wartime leader, Mon Mothma could have stayed in power indefinitely, but because of her ailing health, Mon Mothma stepped down from power. And without her guidance, the New Republic Senate would split into two distinct parties, the populace and the centrists. And just like in real democracies, these political factions begin to focus more on politics than, passing policy or improving the lives of the citizens of the New Republic. Soon, both factions would wage destructive political campaigns against each other in an attempt to seize power. This would ultimately leave the New Republic completely unprepared for the rise of the First Order. Now, I was disappointed, like a lot of people, with the failure of the sequel trilogy. But it seems like The Mandalorian now has begun to revisit this part of Star Wars lore, and I'm kind of excited about it because I invested some time in reading these books. And in the third season of The Mandalorian, we're treated with an episode that mainly takes place on Coruscant. The New Republic, at least on the surface, appears to be far kinder and benevolent as a government system. For instance, there's a huge amount of resources being devoted to deprogramming Imperials and reintroducing them into normal New Republic society. The General Amnesty Program was actually created by Mon Mothma, and that was actually a key part of her post-war plan. The idea was to end the war as soon as possible and convince as many warlords and pockets of resistance to just give up and join the New Republic. Liberal democracies have this admirable trait where they prefer to champion the causes of minority groups and groups that are perhaps very vulnerable to outside pressures. Whereas authoritarian regimes use minority groups as scapegoats for domestic tension. One way of doing things is clearly morally wrong, but that doesn't mean the results from these authoritarian regimes are better than the results we get from liberal democracies. Sometimes championing the rights of minorities too much can cause a lot of problems with the majority. In the New Republic's case, they decide to rehabilitate the minority Imperials instead of just jailing or executing them. Now, this might pay off in the long run, I think, but in the short run, it's created ample opportunities for Imperial spies to infiltrate the New Republic, as is the case with Elia Kane, who's able to neutralize Dr. Pershing and prevent him from passing on his Imperial knowledge to the New Republic. The compassionate incompetency of liberal democracies is a real thing, and we see it everywhere on Coruscant during The Mandalorian. You have all of these, bureaucrats, politicians, and elite, and they are just super cringy in what they say.
It must be wonderful now that you work with a government that appreciates your contribution, no?
Yes, a government that appreciates Dr. Pershing so much that he's been assigned to archive captured Imperial equipment instead of being allowed to work on his cloning research.
After everything you've been through, you're just so brave.
I'm such an inspiration.
I'm so glad you're working for us now.
Yes, they are so glad, and they are nothing like the Empire. Except when Dr. Pershing gets arrested for trying to open up his own lab, what happens?
This is a mind flayer.
This is a 602 mitigator. It's a non-invasive experimental treatment recently approved for rehabilitation.
No, it's a mind flayer.
Dr. Pershing is completely right. That fucking thing is a mind flayer. It's just wrapped in a bit more friendly packaging and dialed down quite a bit to prevent permanent damage or memory loss. Just like the Empire had problems getting rid of signs of the Republic, the same could be said for the New Republic and its attempt to move past the Empire. It is kind of funny that they kept the mind flayer, but they're throwing out tons of Imperial weapons and, lab equipment. It doesn't really make sense. This is also, by the way, why the Imperials in the Amnesty Program have numbers instead of names. Anyway, while one of the New Republic's best Imperial assets gets cooked like a potato, this happens.
You are a real credit to this program. It's nice to know that for every failure, there's a success like you.
The New Republic is just full of individuals like this, ideological, compassionate, but very naive. This guy is unable and untrained to see that Elia Kane is clearly an Imperial operative. You also have this class of extremely rich people living in the core who have no idea what's going on, and that is because their money insulates them from everything.
Empire, rebels, New Republic, I can't keep track. That's why I should just keep my mouth shut.
We try not to get involved.
The world of Plazir 15 features an even more extreme direct democracy system. This means every person in society gets a vote, and we immediately see this causing quite a lot of issues. Beneath the surface of this idyllic world is an economy that is 100% driven by droid labor. In recent days, many droids have begun malfunctioning and even have started attacking citizens. But because the people of Plazir 15 are so used to their droid servants and workforce, a referendum aimed at shutting down the droids on the planet so that they can figure out what is going on fails to pass. This is a direct result of direct democracy. I mean, sometimes what the people want, this might sound elitist, is not exactly good for the people. I mean, the masses sometimes do some really dumb things.
Our constables are ill-equipped to confront battle droids.
The people have voted for the police to be unarmed. And, that group of Mandalorian mercenaries out there, that army, well,
our charter forbids any standing army from entering our city.
Running a democracy requires a lot of courage and intelligence. Unlike a dictatorship where you can basically do whatever you want, a leader of a democratic system must, figure out how to get things done within the system while still obeying all those rules and regulations. And the workaround that Jack Black figures out here to get the Mandalorians to help them with their droid problem is actually pretty genius.
The people have voted we are a pluralistic society. You are Mandalorians. Weaponry and armor are intrinsic to your culture, are they not?
They are.
You see where we're going here?
Here on Earth, there's a group of individuals known as Sikhs, and they encounter a similar problem. The men in their religion traditionally carry a really beautiful looking dagger known as the kirpan. In a country where religious expression and freedom are important, a Sikh should technically be allowed to carry their kirpan to areas where you have heightened security, and usually, sharp objects are not allowed, like inside of a balloon store. Anyway, the point is, a direct democracy system can be highly inefficient and even outright dangerous if the voting populace is not well educated or informed. Plazir 15 finds a way around this once again by using that droid labor force. The civilians don't have to really work, and so they can spend a lot more time devoting energy to figuring out which policies are best for their direct democracy government. But even so, an educated population with a lot of information might not be a wise one. And there are many traps that a democratic system can fall into. For instance, what prevents voters from just supporting the candidate who offers to give them the most money, even if it's not sustainable in the long term? Also, there are certain issues that are just far too complicated for a referendum. Brexit is a great example. This wasn't just a yes or no vote, it was actually an entire issue, a decoupling of the EU that had several different regional and domestic issues involved into it. This is why Brexit took so freaking long to actually implement. Although democracies have many hazards and pitfalls, it's still clear that democratic systems are far superior to their authoritarian counterparts, where you not only see suppression of various groups that are not aligned with the state, but just overall decrease in happiness, prosperity, and economic growth. Now, I know a lot of people out there are going to be like, oh, Western democracies are horrible. Look at America, there's racism, income inequality, and police brutality. But just because you can read and figure out information and then repeat it to other people doesn't mean what you're saying actually makes any sense. You can't really compare living standards in a country like America compared to North Korea, or even compared to the average person living in Russia. It's very clear people prefer to live in one country and not the other. For good reason. Plazir 15, for all of its issues, still looks like an abundantly rich planet in a very poor part of the galaxy. The droids that are used in the labor force actually enjoy adding their value to the planet. Many of these droids were formerly a part of the Separatist Alliance and have found refuge on this very accepting world. The increased economic production from these droids are reinvested into society and not the military, which allows for steady and strong growth. And finally, as we mentioned before, because the people are free to devote more time on studying policy and how governing works, you actually have a more functional democracy. And as a result, we see a more open, trusting society steered by the policies of naive but well-meaning people. For all of you people who do live in a democracy, we can't just go around with our heads held up high and say, oh, we live in a democracy, we're just better than everyone else, that's it. If you want to be lazy and just let other people make decisions for you, I recommend living under an authoritarian regime. But democracies, they require constant vigilance and maintenance. People need to be invested in the system, believe in it, and be active participants. No political system asks more from its people, and no political system delivers more to its people. So there you have it, guys. That is today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.